Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Welcome to the continuing meeting from Tuesday of the Board of Supervisors. At this time, we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Supervisor Papanelli, could you read this, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, folks. This is a continuation of our board meeting from last Tuesday. We are discussing an agendized item identified as item number 1 on the regular agenda. And prior to getting into that, is there any announcements by the board or staff? Seeing none, council, I would like to confirm one thing. As a continuation of this meeting, we did not officially close the closed session, anticipating any times to go back into that closed session. Does that extend to this session?
That is correct. This is a continuance from the agendized meeting 2 days ago. And so any item that was on the agenda from 2 days ago that was still open is certainly relevant to today's meeting because it's just a continuance of that meeting. So at this point, it would be the closed session item, I believe it was number 2 from that agenda. And then the other item is regarding the public hearing regarding the cannabis ordinance.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure that was clear. Ladies and gentlemen, we have already conducted our public comment period for this meeting. This is a continuation. And we actually conducted our public comment period for this agenda item that we're going to be discussing today. I want to make sure everybody's clear on that. Is there any other announcements by the Board of Supervisors or staff? Seeing none, Mr. Maurer, could you give us a brief history of where we are and where we're going?
Yes, so we started discussing some of the differences between the alternatives and taking some polls as to what direction the board felt was appropriate. I have prepared a handout, a cheat sheet, if you will, of the differences between alternatives 1 and 2, or A and B. I think everyone in the audience also was able to see it on the podium and get a copy of it. We discussed some of those items already, but I just want to have the complete list before you. We talked about personal cultivation, and my understanding was the majority of the board felt that outdoor cultivation for personal use was appropriate, establishing a 75-foot setback with fencing, and a provision that with approval from the adjacent affected property owner, that 75-foot setback could be reduced. We then discussed caregiver provisions, and I know Julie was taking better notes than I was on that section, so I really don't remember exactly what happened, but between the two of us, we will have those provisions that you pulled on. But I think caregiver was going to be limited to the 12 plants, two patients, and they otherwise had to meet the outdoor requirements of commercial cannabis to be able to cultivate for a caregiver. There was some discussion on self-distribution, and that was tabled to come back to. And that self-distribution is the provision for a cultivator to distribute his own product, and it's limited to that. It's not a full distributorship. And then there was discussion on the cap. And I don't know if there was a final poll taken as to what the determination was. I know there was discussion about retaining the 50 cap. We talked about it being 50 parcels, which would allow 2 smaller cultivators to sort of pool their resources located on a single parcel, as long as it did not exceed the maximum capacity of 22,000 square feet. I think that's what we settled on at the time, but I don't know if a final poll was taken by the board, if that was the direction. So that was where we left it on Tuesday at 6 o'clock, and we're ready to move forward.
Okay. Does everybody on the board and staff agree with the history? I understand there were several tabled items. Is there any conflict with that tabled item status?
Just trying to establish clarity, and that is with the outdoor option, that if you're going to go outdoor, that means then your ability to grow 6 plants indoors would be negated, even though it's required or allowed under Prop 64. We give them the option to take them outdoors if they want to go outdoors. But that doesn't simply move it to a 12-plant maximum simply because you chose to go outdoors.
That's correct.
Is
So
that
you get
clarity
6
there?
plants. You don't get both.
Right.
It can be indoor or outdoor, but your maximum is 6 plants for personal use.
Okay.
And I think we might be using different language. My understanding, tell me if I'm wrong, was for primary caregiver, it was gonna be 6 plants outdoor maximum regardless if you had patients. If you have your own personal 6 plants and then an additional 12 plants for 2 patients, 6 of those 18 plants can be outside, the rest have to be inside. I think that's what, with 75-foot setbacks, I don't know if I remember the board deciding at the end that for the non-commercial, you wanted to use the commercial siting requirements. But again, this is my memory, everybody's got different notes, so.
We talked about having requirements for a fence, that you can't see it.
Yeah.
And it need to be locked enclosure, so, and I thought we had limited it to 6 outside, and whether he wants to claim it's his or it's part of the caregiver, but the other 12 had to go inside.
And then did the board expect that outside would require commercial setback requirements if it's only 6 plants? I thought that the board had deviated from that.
We had, from what I understood, we had deviated from that to the 75-foot setback with the understanding that they could go to their neighbors and get an approval to grow closer, a setback closer than 75 feet.
Is that what everybody remembers? Okay.
Yes, and
Okay.
they would need, the neighbors say it doesn't bother them or whatever.
The other part was,
Now, before we go there, Supervisor Mills, I seem to recall an issue of a maximum of 12 plants. Was that part of that discussion, and we determined it was going to be a 6-plant limit?
The 12, so if you're just a personal grower for yourself, the limit, as I understood it, was going to be the state was going to be the same 6 plants you could have inside. You can choose whether you want them inside or outside. Only a primary caregiver would be able to have an additional 12 plants for up to 2 patients. If they have 1 patient, they have 6 plants. If they have 2 patients, they have 12 plants. So the maximum possible for a primary caregiver registration would be 18 plants, 12 for somebody else, and 6 for them. That's what I thought we had.
And that was a maximum of 12 plants outdoor?
No, 6 plants outdoor.
6 plants outdoor.
Regardless of whether it's personal or primary caregiver. If you happen to have an additional 6 or 12 plants for a patient, and you have a primary caregiver registration, the way I understood it is those would have to be inside. You only get 6 outside.
Okay.
Is that what everybody
Everybody clear
understands?
on that on the board?
from my point, I was trying to limit how many plants we have indoors, if at all possible, for many reasons. It's not just the fire department, it has to do with discharging, et cetera. But if we could limit it to 6 plants indoors and take anything else outdoors with an understanding of those setback requirements, we would be in a safer environment, and I'm sure that a cleaner environment for all concerned. That was my reasoning for possibly pushing those 12 plants, if we want 12, outside.
Supervisor Toffenelli, your lights on? Comments?
Well, I certainly understand the safety aspect of it. And certainly, if they are a primary caregiver, they have the ability to grow 6 or 12 if they have 2 patients, and which is what we put a limit on, and then 6 indoors. So I don't really care. I understand the safety portion of it. I don't know if it would be safer for 6 indoors or safe for 12. you know, I don't know, because it would depend on the structure itself and where they're growing. So, I don't know if they plan on using their home or constructing an additional building adjacent to it, or what, which would require codes, I'm sure, because it'd be bigger than a 10 by 10. So,
Well, anything with plumbing or electricity requires a permit regardless of size, even if it's less.
well, you're right, electrical or plumbing, regardless of size, 100%. 10 by 10 is without anything there, so
Right.
they would require permits for it. And I think we had talked about previously, I think it's covered on alternative 1, I don't know where it is in alternative 2, about separate tanks for the runoff being required for any indoor grows.
It was on page 117 of our packet, number 6 on page 117. We can address that later if you'd like.
And we can move on from that, so.
Supervisor,
I'm
I'm
open to
sorry.
either 12 indoors or 12 outdoors, as long as the requirements of the fence, and if you're closer than 75 feet, the amount of 12, the concerns I have with 12 outdoors, and even at 75 feet, is the neighbors complaining about the odor coming from those plants, starting in September, August, September, October, whatever. So
Do we want to deal with odor as a separate issue in this whole discussion?
we can do that.
Well, we're talking outdoor cultivation right now for Prop 64 reasons, and do we need to continue on the odor issue, or do you want to discuss that now? I mean, we're on that.
Point of order, please.
Procedural, sir. I'll hear your point of order at the mic.
George Fry. It is procedural. I watched for a while last night on TV the board's remarks and what have you from Tuesday. And there are a couple of people on the board, I don't want to front anybody off, but you please need to move your microphone much closer. There's
Thank you.
three
Point of order
of
well
you.
taken. Thank you, Mr. Fry. Board members and staff, I'm going to request that you please be cautious of the mic position so everybody can clearly understand what we're saying.
So the state law says that you must allow someone to grow up to 6 plants for their own personal use. Under state law, it can be either indoor or outdoor, and we have the ability to limit it to indoor only. Perhaps a solution to this is that if you're growing 6 plants, whether it's growing 6 plants outdoors, whether it's for your own personal use or as a caregiver, then the provisions that you established on Tuesday of 75 feet, must be fenced and secure, would apply regardless. But if you're going to grow more than that outdoors, even as a caregiver, then you meet the provisions of the commercial standards as the Planning Commission recommended. And that way it gets the odor issue and the distance issue addressed. So if they want to grow, 12 plants for a caregiver outdoors, then they meet a greater setback. That's a possible solution. And so the 6 plants outdoor would be subject to the 75-foot setback, but still, fenced and secure. But anything above and beyond that would need to meet the same standards as commercial.
Supervisor Tofinelli, issue with that? And the light's on, sir. And Supervisor Clapp, you're next. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just thinking if they grow more than 6 outdoors, could we require that any more than that be in a greenhouse, covered greenhouse, which would confine the odors?
We could do that.
Okay. Further questions?
No.
Supervisor Clapp, I'm sorry.
Mine's go back at the very beginning when they were talking about multiple grows on one site. My understanding was it wasn't limited to 2, it could have up to 22,000 square foot. So if you had 4 people that would come up with a combination of 22,000 feet, you could have 4 people on there with multiple license. That was my understanding of Tuesday's discussion, not 2.
I believe that's correct. That's correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
that's what my
Yeah,
my
and that
understanding
was for commercial cultivation?
For commercial cultivation.
Yes.
And we're speaking the personal cultivation under Prop 64
Right, I think
guidelines.
Supervisor Clapp was just clarifying my prior comment where I
All
said
right,
we
good.
have two.
Thank you.
Two or more.
It could be more than two?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Further comments? I understand that this is addressed in the Planning Commission's recommendations as far as following the guidelines set forth, described by Planning Director Peter Maurer. Is there any further discussion, or do we need a poll of the board to address this issue?
Just for clarification, what we've just discussed,
I'm going to have you speak closer to
sorry.
the mic, sir.
just just for clarification, we just discussed something that is a bit different than the Planning Commission's recommendations
That's correct.
or the Board of Supervisors' recommendations.
Yes.
So we're talking about 6 plants outdoors with the setbacks that we discussed, with the caveat, you get to deal with your neighbor. Anything more than that is going to fall under a commercial. So a caregiver would be restricted by zoning and setbacks, just like a commercial. Is that where we're at?
For them to grow outdoors.
Right.
Yes.
If they're indoors, that's fine.
Yep.
Okay.
And if they elect to go outdoors, they have to follow the Planning Commission's recommendation, which is our commercial
Well, whatever,
standard.
yeah, whatever the standards that are established for commercial. If they want
Right.
to grow more than 6 plants outdoors, they would need to meet those standards. That's a suggestion, it's not, you know,
Okay,
To which we haven't established any standards at this point.
not yet.
yeah. Supervisor Mills.
The point too is that if we can, instead of pushing them outdoors in those situations of 12 plants, that you go to the greenhouse scenario as you talked about, I think that would make it be a resolution too, besides going to commercial setback standards. Let's be thinking about how they might be able to work that scenario, because people are going to be looking for ways to do this. So if we have that included in this discussion now, at least it solves some of that question.
So as I understand it, we have 2 issues here, actually 2 suggestions. One, a greenhouse regulated outdoor grow for Prop 64 compliance, or we can go with the Planning Commission recommendation of following the commercial cannabis cultivation. Am I correct in that, gentlemen? So we have 2 issues. Do we need to further discuss this or take a poll of the vote, poll of the board on those 2 issues? I think we're going to be taking a poll of the board on Supervisor Tofinelli?
Under the greenhouse scenario, the same thing applies as if they were growing 6 outdoors with the 75-foot setback, and if it's any closer, they need their neighbors to agree to it under those provisions.
Okay. We can poll on that issue if you'd like.
Can we, as we poll, can perhaps the planning director lay out specifically what we're polling on?
Okay.
It's not exactly clear to me,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
All
I
right.
think there may be more than 2 issues.
There may be more.
So the first one, I understand, is you want to keep a maximum of 6 outdoor plants to meet the lesser standard of a 75-foot or reduced setback for personal use, or for a caregiver to grow not more than 6 plants outdoors. I think there's consensus there. So then the next question would be,
Well, look, Mr. Maurer, maybe we can handle that one issue at a time and take
Okay.
a poll. That'd probably be
right.
better. Okay, does everybody understand the issue that is subject to the poll on the board? And no confusion there? Then let's take a poll,
Hold on a second.
okay?
It keeps being evaded here. In addition to that, the requirement is that they have a 6-foot locked fence that is continuous.
yes.
And you
fully
cannot see
enclosed.
through it, so it prevents children and anything else from getting into it. So that is on part of what we're polling.
Is that right, Mr. Maurer? That's the way you see it?
If I can ask, I agree with the safety and we need to lock these things up. My question would be, does the fence need to be opaque? If you can't see it from anywhere else, I just see a lot of poorly constructed fences trying to keep people from viewing when they could be done perhaps
Well, that's why,
chain link work. Obviously, we have to protect the kids, but I'm just, the opaqueness. If that's an issue, I could take it, but just, do we want to put that in there?
my suggestion before was is that it be a wood fence built with Calaveras County lumber, if you recall. But an opaque fence can lead to some pretty ugly fences. And it is a security issue that only takes a knife to get through it. So where you have a wooden fence or some type of security fence constructed that is not visible, you can't see through it, but also protects people and animals from climbing through it as well, can be part of this discussion.
Mr. Mauer, the requirements under our current UO for fencing on commercial grows, what are those standards?
The standards are a little bit unclear under the urgency ordinance, which is part of the problem, but under the drafts, we've stated they have to be made of metal or wood, and I think, I can't remember if it's non-climbable or there's some other language in there, and I've looked that up, but we can get that for you.
Okay.
Can I just quickly clarify a little bit about, I hear Prop 64 being discussed. Under state law, the only thing the county cannot restrict is 6 plants indoors, either inside a residence or in an accessory structure. So if people who are just doing their own 6 plants for themselves want to grow in an accessory structure to their house, that is already something they can do by right. We can still, so we can't prohibit them from growing inside those 6 plants or in a greenhouse, those 6 plants. I just want to clarify that. If beyond 6 plants, we can.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we were talking more about the 6 plants outside of a greenhouse, outside of a residence, and that we wanted those plants outdoors to be fenced.
Yeah, but I understand Council's point where it's very clear to me now that if we're talking 6 plants out of a structure, i.e. greenhouse, i.e. indoors, these are the 6 plants that are outdoor.
Yeah.
With no containment whatsoever. Correct. That's what we're talking about, right?
So the fence requirement, and this is in 070F for, this is for commercial medical cannabis cultivation. I'm sorry, E. 10, no,
What's the page, Peter?
page,
20.
packet page 115, it's page 32. And I'm thinking this happens to be from the Planning Commission regulatory
33.
ordinance, but the language is the same in
33.
both. The cultivation area shall be fully enclosed by a metal or wooden fence at least 6 feet in height that is of a strength that reasonably prevents against access by trespassers and children. Access to the cultivation area shall be secured by a lock of reasonable strength to prevent against access by trespassers and children.
Anybody have a problem with that standard?
No.
So we're clear? Can we conduct a poll now, applying those standards to the fencing requirement or issue? Excellent. Supervisor Toffenelli?
Yes.
Supervisor Uramendi?
Yes.
Supervisor Clapp?
No.
Supervisor Mills?
Yes.
Supervisor Olivera, yes.
Chair, may I offer a suggestion here? Yes, is that for clarity and being able to hear everyone, maybe we should just leave all our mics on and then just simply raise our hands or make some motion to you, because we have times where people are voting and saying things and their mics aren't on.
I think that's a good idea.
As long as you guys are okay with my sniffling and
I'm
coughing.
okay.
We're fine as long as you
okay.
sniffle and cough towards Supervisor Toffenelli.
Hey, Mike, you gave me this one. Sit next to me.
I'm sorry, Gary.
So just as a note with your microphones, they work the best if they are right in front of you.
Right.
And you're speaking directly in them. You do not have to be as close as I am. You can be this far back or about this far back, but it's the best that way.
Okay, thank you. If you'd like to address, please just raise your hand, but don't throw any bricks. Next issue.
Okay, so we have the fencing established. I think we're still trying to resolve where plants can be for non-commercial caregiver cultivation. And the options, I believe, that are before you are, they must all be inside. They can be, 6 of those plants could be outdoors in the same standard as the personal use, or they could be all outdoor if they meet the commercial standard.
Any confusion on that, gentlemen? Seeing none, we'll call for a poll.
Well, actually, I'd like to discuss a little further, simply because if we say under Prop 64, you can have 6 plants indoors, yours, and we can regulate the rest of it. Is there a way we can push those other 6, those caregiver plants outdoors
Yes,
and keep them out of that house
Yes.
yes,
or a accessory structure?
right.
I would rather do that simply to try to limit how many plants we're going to have in a structure.
That's a policy call by the board.
Everybody understand Supervisor Mills' issue?
I believe he's wanting to put commercial grows in the middle of my neighborhood, is what I believe he's wanting. 18 plants is a commercial operation, and that just opens up, I mean, I have problems with bark of dogs, chickens, roosters, everything else, and now Mr. Mills wants to put 18 plants in backyards of my neighborhood. I think that's insane.
Further discussion? Seeing none, we'll poll the board. We'll start with Supervisor Clapp,
No.
Supervisor Mills,
Yes.
Supervisor Toffenelli,
Yes.
Supervisor Garamendi,
Yes.
Supervisor Olivera, yes. Poll indicates 4-1. Next issue, Mr. Mauer.
All right. Okay. All right, so the next thing on the list then is the, so finalize the discussion on the caps.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Supervisor Toffenelli.
I would like to go into closed session at this time and have a discussion with county council before we move forward.
County Council? We can do that? Ladies and gentlemen, we will be in closed session for an undetermined amount of time. We will let you know in about 15 minutes if we'll be longer, okay? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We will report out on closed session at the end of today's session. If we need to go back in, we'll make that report out at one time. So let's go back to where we were, Mr. Mauer, if you will.
So I think we were.
I'm sorry.
Before we start, Mr. Chair,
Okay.
can I ask that we pull the board and as far as the cap, discussion on the cap, can we postpone that and put it off until later on after we've gone through these other items?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. What was the last part of your statement, sir?
Until we go through the other items here, can we postpone this item, the cap, until the end and discuss it at the very end?
Let me consider that for a moment. I'll need your opinion, staff and board. Do we anticipate finishing this meeting today? I don't know when postponing is going to be, if you understand what I'm trying to say. We're going to be here for a while today. I just want to make sure we have enough time to address all the issues. I intend to get this done today. I'll be quite honest.
I would hope we would get it done today.
Okay.
But I'm just asking to postpone it for at least till we go through some of the other items here.
I don't have a problem with that, as long as we get this addressed.
We will get it addressed.
Okay. Any further comments on postponing that until later?
As long as we get it today.
Okay. Supervisor Toffenai, Supervisor Garamendi?
Yeah, it's pretty fundamental to everything else. So
Okay.
I don't know how long we can
Great.
postpone it without talking about.
Supervisor Toffenelli, I think that's a great idea. I agree with you.
Thank you.
All right.
Oh, and I don't count.
You, Dennis, what do you want?
No, that's fine. Chopped liver here.
Any other issues? I'm sorry. Mr. Mauer, could you please continue? Did you understand we're going to be postponing that until later?
Yes, sometime later today. So the next item then on our list would be the retention of nursery stock. This is something that the Planning Commission added with the concern that there are certain growers that have unique strains, and if they were to completely shut down and have to, eliminate all of their plant material during the transition from the urgency ordinance registrations to a new permit type, that they might lose that. So they allowed for a provision that they could keep nursery stock, unflowering plant material, up to 10% of their canopy until such time as they got a new permit. And this is in section 050B3. It's on page 11 of the Planning Commission's recommended alternative.
Mr. Mauer, I have a question. Are we taking in consideration the new regulation where it goes to track and trace on the state level compared to canopy size? I mean, is that an effect of what we're talking about right now? I know we talked 10% of the canopy size.
Well, our regulations will still address canopy size.
Okay.
Canopy size. So that's something that we have, 22,000 square feet or of outdoor or mixed light and 10,000 square feet of indoor cultivation. That is still a requirement under our code. And I believe it's still a standard that the state uses as well as the type of license that they have. So canopy is still an applicable standard to use.
Okay, I want to make sure that's clear.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Issues, questions by the board?
Well, bringing this up, they would still have the right to grow 6 plants regardless.
That's true.
So they could still keep the nursery stock alive, the strain, with 6 plants.
Well, on top of that, you could possibly have 2 caregiver, so you could have 18.
Well, this is commercial cultivation, so
Right.
Under the ordinance, they have 90 days after its effective date to shut down their operation. And then, whatever time period it takes to get a new permit, they would not be able to be cultivating. So even if they were to, they'd have to file an application as a caregiver, and they would need to show that there's patients and all that, so.
Well, 10% would be 2,200 square foot
Right.
canopy size.
Then they have to be immature plants.
Is that 10% number of clone non-flowering plants? How do we
Correct.
determine that? 10% of a 22,000 allotted canopy size? And if
Whatever
they're going to
their
keep 10% as a
approved
clone
permit.
stock,
So whatever their approved registration is under the urgency ordinance, if they had a 10,000 square foot issued registration, they could keep up to 1,000 square feet of plant material, which is typically kept indoor during the non-flowering time, or early stages of development.
Council, if we have questions regarding the cultivation, it's my understanding that we could ask those people that are considered expert / well-versed for information for the board in making decisions. Is that correct? And same for people that have the same expertise on a ban issue.
Certainly, the board chair and any other board member has the option to request additional information from whether it be staff, a member of the public that would have information to help deliberate and help in the process of deliberation on either side of the issue. That would be something that the board, either the board chair or the board as a whole, could request.
Okay.
There's nothing legally or under the Brown Act that would preclude you from doing that, no.
Just wanted that for clarity. Seeing I have no expertise in marijuana cultivation or cannabis cultivation, I have a question. It's exactly if you have a 10,000 authorized, permitted canopy size grow, how much is 10% in clone plants? I have no idea. How much room would that take, and what's the quantity of that? Does anybody on staff have that answer? Anybody on the Board of Supervisors have that answer? Seeing none, Mr. Bolger, can I ask you that question? And I want to qualify for those folks that don't know. It's my understanding that you were the first permitted commercial cultivation operation in Calaveras County.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
And obviously, you're here for another year, so it's successful. So if you get paid for an activity and you're a professional in, I would recommend that you might be deemed as an expert.
I wouldn't go that far, but I'll allow
Can
it.
you answer the question for me? How much room is a 10% of a clone plant operation from a 10,000 square foot canopy grow? How much room is that? Can I have a comparison?
You know, it's very difficult to pinpoint that answer. You know, it depends on what type of operation. If you are a full season outdoor where you're only doing a single harvest per year, whether you're a mixed light operation that's going to have 3 or 4 continuous harvests throughout the season, or if you're an indoor operation which could have potentially 6 harvests per year. I think that more so than just the nursery stock, the intent of the Planning Commission, and I can't speak for them, but not only would it allow you to preserve your unique genetics, this would actually allow you to be able to get a crop off for the following year. If we have a hard shutdown where all our genetic stock's lost, clones, mothers, teens, whatever stage of non-flowering plant they are, if you had to start from scratch, you're more than likely not going to have a 2018 outdoor season. I think what the board should take into consideration is that, you know, Measure C is based off production as soon as track and trace comes into play. CDFA will have track and trace implemented and mandated by July 1st of 2018. So,
Okay, we want to stick to the question, okay? Okay, you can continue. I just want to make sure we stay on track.
yeah, my thought is here, essentially, if the cultivator has no ability to get a 2018 crop, the county brings in very little or no revenue off said crop because it's based off production, not off square footage. So I think that's where the Planning Commission was going with that 10% of canopy. It allowed the cultivator the ability, while they were having to move their operation, to still have their genetic stock to where once they've gotten the full approval from the planning department, they would have the ability to start their operation at the new property.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Mr. Walter, Supervisor Garamendi.
What do these look like? I mean, what do these clones look like? Can you describe us to what plant we're talking about?
Well, this would all be non-flowering, so there's no bud to it. There's no usable product. It's just vegetative material. So you're talking leaf and stem. So there's no odor. As Mr. Maurer stated, it wouldn't be outside. We're talking indoor only. You know, a mother plant could be anywhere from 2 to 7 feet tall. A clone could be 5-6 inches. It depends on how far it is in its life cycle.
There's no odor to them, correct?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Bolger.
I have a question.
I'm sorry.
So if you're taking indoor harvest at 6 per year, you're basically taking it down to 5 per year if that's the case. In other words, it wouldn't take them very long if they're indoor to ramp back up. Same thing with mixed at 4 harvests per year. That's not going to take a long time. It's mostly the outdoor that you're talking about that would be severely impacted.
Correct. And if you look at, if people are having to move their operation, it's virtually impossible that they're going to have either a fully automated greenhouse ready to go. I'd say vast majority, if not everyone that has to move their operations is going to have to go with a single season outdoor harvest.
Okay. Is this concerning outdoor cultivation only we're talking about? I know you made reference to indoor cultivation. Do you have any indoor cultivation?
Well, I have a mixed light operation, so we
Okay.
have
You do
everything.
both then?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, every operation, whether it's indoor, outdoor, mixed light, they rely on vegetative cuttings to start their crop.
So this would only apply to those that could potentially meet the requirements of whatever ordinance we're putting in place. The rest of them are going to be done anyway.
Well, I guess that's up for you guys to decide. My thought process here is, if people are able to move, they're going to have to utilize their current facilities at their current registered site to start their crop for the following year. If there's a hard shutdown, I mean, they're dead in the water. And if you have any questions about indoor specifically, I'd suggest Prapana Smith. I'm not a full-time indoor cultivator.
That's where I was going with that, if we
Okay.
need to address it.
I do have a question of Mark.
Supervisor Toffenali.
So basically hearing what you're saying, then this would only affect a mixed light application permit.
I think it would affect everybody,
It would affect everybody.
but it could affect a single-season outdoor harvest probably greater, and that's the largest percentage of what we have in the county.
Okay.
Supervisor Garamendi?
So, if this continues forward, we've got there's a 90 days to cease operation, which would take a grower that's working in the county right now, to middle of April roughly. And that's not enough time to move that out. So what we'd be doing is not just forcing a grower to move, but we'd then also be taking or seizing their ability to move. They couldn't, the timing wouldn't work.
They could move, but they wouldn't have a crop to plant.
They wouldn't have a crop to plant, right? So we're taking their seed corn, for lack of a better term.
That's how I view it, yeah.
Further questions of Mr. Bolger?
Yeah, I do.
Supervisor Clapp?
Mark, how many degrees do you have in horticulture at college level?
I have my associate in my AA degree from San Joaquin Delta College, where I studied plant science and soil science.
Okay.
That's the extent of it. School of Hard Knocks, though.
Okay, so what would the difference from taking your clippings, and once you change the lighting in it, how long would it take for it to start flowering?
Well, cannabis is a photosensitive plant, so typically if you want to induce flowering either indoors or in a greenhouse, you're going to go to 12 hours of darkness per day. So currently, anyone that's has vegetative stock, either mothers or clones going right now, it's going to be at 18 hours minimum to stop them from flowering.
So basically, you would have a crop ready to do anytime you wanted to by just changing the light on it.
Yes, yeah, if you reduce the light cycle down to 12 hours, that would be true.
Further questions of Mr. Bolger? Seeing none, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Prapana Smith, I understand that you are the resident most knowledgeable person in the world regarding indoor cultivation. Is there anything you'd like to add for the benefit of the understanding of the board members?
Well, to answer your question about sizes for indoor, a clone, when a cutting is taken, it's about that big. All right, and after it roots, then we put it into its early veg stage, and when it gets to be about 5-6 inches, then that 5-6 inch plant is what we put inside our chambers when we switch to 12-12 light. And then that kicks in the flowering process. Now, regarding the impact on a hard shutdown, I can tell you that the genetics they're treasured genetics. Some of them, we're the only people in the world that have them. There are certain genetics, like accidents happen, you get a seed and you pop it and it turns out to be a good plant. You're the only one in the world that has that genetic. And so the value of the genetics we have, it really, as Mr. Bolger has said, is critical to allow us to continue business. I'll also point out, in defense of indoor, right now nobody's operating but indoor at this point in time. So a hard shutdown you're only shut down 2 indoor operations in the county with a hard shutdown at this point in time. But to answer the question, they're about that tall. How many feet? Would 10% be enough if you went that way? I would say it's probably enough, but it's not based on number of plants. A mother plant for us, if we take a clone that doesn't go into the grow and convert and get flipped to flower, we keep extras for future moms, and we keep them about that tall. When those moms are destroyed after cuttings are taken off of them, they're not more than maybe a foot tall. That's the way we do it. That's our system. So they never get really big. So 10% for us would probably be enough if it came down to that kind of a call.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. In all fairness, is there anybody qualified as an experienced person from the opposing side that would wish to make any statements regarding this issue, please, I'm going to ask for your qualifications. Seeing none, we'll get back to Mr. Mauer. Is there any further questions by the board or staff regarding this issue?
I have a question of Mr. Bauer. Given what was testified here and given what's being said here, of the 22,000 square foot canopies that we have registered or in the process of being registered, they're asking for a 10%, or they're testifying that they use 10% for their core crop. So are we aware of that? Are you aware that there's up to 2,000 square feet of indoor growing going on continuously to maintain the crop size? Is that part of the permit, or when they get an outdoor permit, are they only able to grow outdoors?
Most of what we have are mixed light, which is a combination of outdoor and indoor. And so as Mr. Bolger testified, the indoor, the starts, the clones are kept indoors during the winter season and then moved to an outdoor, or in some cases like a greenhouse, and then to full outdoor. So yes, it's a year-round process.
When I asked him the question, does this only apply to indoor or to mixed light permits, he said no. So my question again is, are we aware of the ones that aren't mixed light are doing this?
Yes, we are aware that that is a component of the outdoor cultivation activity. I think it's something of a gray area in our urgency ordinance, and I don't know if the state licensure process considers that mixed light or full outdoor.
So then my next question, I guess, would be to Ed Short. Are all of these buildings or whatever they're called, have they all been inspected that they are properly being maintained? They're under UBC, their electrical, everything is up to standards. When we go out to inspect any of these sites to issue them a permit, do we look at those facilities?
I know that the code enforcement inspection team does that. They look at all the structures that are associated with the cultivation, and anything that they identify that even looks like it may not be in compliance with our building codes, they will be cited for that.
Okay. Thank you.
So just for clarity,
Supervisor
then,
Mills?
your outdoor grows do have nurseries somewhere attached as part of the process. How big the nursery is or how big that greenhouse is subject to debate, depends upon the individual grower. So when you talk about a 22,500 canopy, is that greenhouse space included in that canopy size?
It would be considered part of the canopy, I would assume.
Okay, just want to...
If you have a 22,000 square foot grow that you're registered for, and you're using 2,000 feet indoors, then your outside canopy would only be 20,000 square feet.
That's the way I would interpret it.
I just want to be sure everybody's on the same page and has some clarity with that, is all.
Further questions of Mr. Mauer regarding this issue? Seeing none, we go for a poll of the board. We'll start with Supervisor Toffanelli.
At this point, I would say yes.
Supervisor Garamendi. Thank you, sir. I'm sorry.
As long as the buildings have been inspected and they're up to code, and we don't have electrical cords running everywhere and so forth, they are properly set up and meet UBC codes.
Okay. Supervisor Garamendi?
Yes.
Supervisor Clapp?
No.
Supervisor Mills?
Yes.
Supervisor Oliveira, yes, and I concur with Supervisor Toffanelli, as long as these are up to code and deemed according to law. Mr. Mauer, next issue, sir.
So the next issue is how to address cultivation next to residential parcels. So we have where there's an ag zone parcel next to a residential or rural agricultural parcel, and what the process is for review of those applications to ensure that they don't adversely affect the adjacent property owner. There's sort of a number of different provisions here, but the primary one is that the alternative one requires a hearing before the Planning Commission, and it's a discretionary permit process. It could include SEQA review, apply additional conditions if necessary to ensure that the neighbors are not adversely affected. The Planning Commission's process is, or the alternative two, Planning Commission recommendation is that we process that more like an administrative use permit, where it's something that the planning department notifies property owners, allows a comment, a decision is made by me, still must do SEQA review, and that decision can be appealed to the Planning Commission. I think the intent here was the Commission didn't want to get bogged down with too many hearings. There is another provision in this that any parcel that is adjacent, or any cultivation application site that is adjacent to any zone parcel that has a permitted residence on it must go through the same process.
What page are you on?
This would be on page
19?
In alternative one, 24 and 25 of the page number, and it's section 060F for
I have it. Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then the
Do you have the electronic page
on
number?
page 17, electronic page number, I don't. 51?
51?
For alternative one.
On the planning commission
part?
one, you refer us to the errata.
Yes, we realized that we did not make the change, and so the errata sheet has the actual language that was recommended by the Planning Commission. The one in the draft version itself was the same. And the errata, that would be on page,
Well, I'm certainly glad that we dropped F. That would sort of make everything we're doing up here mute.
Okay. Questions of Mr. Mauer by any board member?
So 1, 2, 3, and
Supervisor
4,
talking about
1, 2, 3, and 4 would apply. 500 feet setbacks, opportunity for neighbor properties, comment, planning commission approves. This would be on the one alternative.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, Peter, just so I'm sure I understand, so if you've got a conforming lot, and it's next to, let's just say you've got an Ag 1 lot, that's next to another Ag 1 lot, but that Ag 1 lot that you're next to has got a house, you know, it's a 600-acre lot, and it's on the back side of that, far away, that would not, you would not have to go through this process, would you? Or would you
The
have to?
way that the draft is written, that would require to go through this process, discretionary process.
So, I mean, is that, do you, I don't want to ask you if you think that's reasonable, I'm thinking in practical terms here, if you've got two big lots next to each other and there's a house a mile away, do you need to go through this whole process? Or can it be within a certain distance of a property line or a grow? I'm just trying to figure out the administration piece.
There was quite a bit of discussion on this issue and how it would be implemented. There was some thought of, well, if the house is more than 500 feet away, then maybe that's not necessary. Then there was discussion, well, what if someone, had a parcel they wanted to build on, and the prime building spot is, within 50 feet of the property line. So, you know, there is just a lot of debate and discussion by the planning commission on this issue. Ultimately, that's what they recommended.
I think we need to take into consideration the existing setback requirements that we have now, and from that setback line is where that number has to go ultimately. Not where a home is on that parcel, but what is the setback perimeter, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. So the maximum setback that we have in any of our zones is 30 feet.
Minimum. So
Minimum.
that means,
minimum, I was gonna
The
say.
largest setback we have for any zones is a minimum of 30 feet. It gets smaller if it's a smaller parcel, but in this case, if it were an R1 or a RR parcel, you might have a 10 or 20-foot setback. But in that case, it would automatically go to the review process anyway.
well, that
So
would,
it's only those parcels that were not a residential parcel that this additional provision planning commission wanted to add. And I think it was something that we discussed with Supervisor Toffanelli as well, that wanted to make sure that other residential, other property owners that live on the property would not be adversely affected by cannabis crop, and have an ability to look at it more closely than just simply a ministerial approval.
And that was a concern that we discussed, whether there was a house a mile away or not, but if there was an opportunity for them to utilize their property and build a home, because there was a suitable pad to build a new home close to that property line within the setbacks of 30 feet or whatever, they shouldn't have their property limited because of that. And so we had a long discussion on this, very long. And I know the planning commission did also, on what to do about that, because you don't want to limit somebody that has a piece of property and their ability to utilize their property. That's their right. So.
I agree. I think that we have to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go right ahead, Supervisor Garamendi.
I just think that, we have a question of fairness here. Everybody has the right to enjoy their property.
Correct. I agree.
On both sides. And I'm just thinking, okay, so you've got two conforming lots, two ag lots next to each other, each of 200 acres. One's got a ranch house way on the other side, and someone wants to put a farm in on their property, using appropriate setbacks. The neighbor says, I'm not so sure I like that. Therefore, when you bring it forward, you say, what I really wanted to do was build a house right on the property line. And so I don't want one neighbor, which may just be a foil. I want to try to be fair to both people to utilize their property. And there's got to be a way to do that without having to go get a CUP on everything. So it'd be great if we could have some discretion as to when, if somebody's already got a house there, totally understand. Absolutely. You don't want to take away their rights by imposing yours. I want to be careful here. It's a property rights issue for both people, both sides.
Well, I agree with you, and that's why the minimum requirement of a 500-foot setback is in place. If you look at what the other part of it is, what Peter brought up, and I think Planning Commission still kept in that case, a 500-foot setback of any residential properties.
I agree. And there should be conflicting, one being, if that ag was next to an RR or an RA, absolutely, I understand that point. I'm just two like properties.
Well, I don't think this, you mean the 500-foot setback on two ag properties, or?
Yeah.
You're saying to reduce the 500-foot setback if it abuts an AP or an AG?
Right.
Well, I think if we move in closer, did we not address that later on, even in A1, about?
Yeah, we bring it up down here in minimum acreage stuff.
Yeah, yes.
Do you want to table that and address that then, or what would you like to do? Supervisor Toffanelli and Supervisor Garamendi?
Okay, circling back.
And Supervisor Glenn.
This, what we're discussing is right now is, what's here is residential parcels.
Right.
When we get to the AP, where they abut AP and like parcels, is a different discussion.
Is that correct?
Well, they're interrelated. This is, the primary component of this section is the hearing before the planning commission, or is it an administrative, not fully administrative, it's a discretionary review at planning director level. That's the primary difference here. There are other issues associated with how far away, do we want to have every parcel that has a house on it go through this process, or do you want to say if it's more than 500 feet away? Those are other issues that are related to this, and it's also tied to the setback. As you know, the planning commission recommended a smaller setback than 500 feet. So all of this is interrelated. I think maybe the first decision is, do you want them all to go to the planning commission, or do you want to have it be viewed at my level with an appeal process?
Well, here's
Supervisor Mills?
something to think about is that if you are noticing the neighbors and within the required limits of size, and you get no response, do you really need to do a CUP? Or should that just be an administrative process? But where you get controversy or you get feedback and need to mitigate, now you're in a CUP situation. How would you write that?
We could certainly craft language to that effect.
I'm okay in pushing this back to the later part of the conversation. I think Gary's correct, so we'll stick to the question at hand.
On the residential part of it?
Well, the question
Pushing
is,
it.
do we want to go to planning commission or do we want it to be administrative?
Right.
I'm okay with it being administrative, just because planning commission's got a lot to deal with every day.
Okay. I guess that's a request for a poll.
Sure.
What
Supervisor
is the
Toffenelli?
question? What is the question?
Question is, Mr. Mayor, I'll let you eloquently restate your question.
So does the review process go to the planning commission, or is it administrative with appeal to the planning commission? Administrative meaning I would make, or my successor would make the determination.
See, I would only approve that if we could have it set up to where there is no controversy, that it could be AUP without any problem.
Okay.
Where you have no public controversy, there's no reason for you to take it into a CUP discussion. But where there is public pushback,
Which is really sort of a third alternative.
yes, thank
So
you.
it's a notification of adjacent property owners, we don't hear anything, or they say we're fine with it, then that's it. It just sort of stays through the normal, essentially a ministerial type process. If there's a concern, then it gets bumped up to either review at my level or a review by the planning commission.
I'll agree with that. You good with that?
I would be good with that.
That's a modified poll. Supervisor
I'm fine
Toffenelli?
with that.
You good with that? Supervisor Garamendi? Supervisor Clapp?
Yeah.
But that was an either or, me or the commission.
Well, you're gonna send out for public notice
We will send out notice,
to surrounding neighbors.
yes. There'll be a time frame to respond. If we don't hear a response, then we'll assume there's no concern and we review it as long as they meet all the other criteria.
Correct.
If there is a response, then do you want the planning commission to take that up, or do you want me to look at it and make a decision first? It could be that someone says no, but they're, the cultivation site is 1,000 feet away or something, there's clearly limited impact on the adjacent property owner.
Okay, but they still have the ability to appeal
But
the
they would have
plan.
that ability to appeal. I'm not advocating either one,
I
I'm just saying
understand.
that's
Yeah.
the process.
You're good with that?
I'm good with that.
I'm good with that.
I'm good with that.
Consensus of the board is we're good with that.
Was that a yes or a good with that?
We're good with that.
And this would apply to anything that's next to residential or res ag, or where there is an existing residence on a parcel regardless of zone,
Correct.
Correct.
including revision would be, see, we talked about caregiver cultivation already, so we're down to minimum acreage. This is on page 30 of the alternative one, board alternative. This is a 50-acre minimum parcel size. The Planning Commission had a series of different sizes: 50 acres if it bordered a community or special plan, 20 acres if it bordered residential or RA or unclassified zoning, or 5 acres if it was completely surrounded by the zones that permit cultivation, which would be A1, AP, or GF.
Mr. Mauer, we're going to take just about a 10-second break here. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be breaking for lunch at 12:30 today, returning at 2 o'clock. So we'll give you the opportunity to plan for your lunch period and the rest of the day, and that's due to administrative appointment that CEO Lutz has to attend. So once again, we're going to go to 12:30, and we're going to come back at 2 o'clock to continue. All right. Thank you, Mr. Mauer. Questions, comments? Who'd like to lead off?
While they're discussing it, the idea of the 5 acres, I think this is in alt 2, is that correct?
Yes.
That isn't in alt 1?
No. Alternative one is 50 acres, flat out, regardless.
Yeah, I cannot get to the 5 acres.
Need a minute here.
It's 31 of alt 2 and 30 of alt 1.
Peter, if I can ask a quick question. The 5 acre surrounded by Ag 1, AP, or GF, how did that come about? How did that get in there? It seems kind of, I don't know many lots like that, so I
Yeah.
can't imagine how we do that.
There was a planning commission discussion. I don't recall who brought that up, why it was inserted. Everyone felt that, well, if you have the rare situation where there is a substandard parcel that's surrounded by it and you know, someone could cultivate it on it and it's not going to affect any of the neighbors because of the fact that someone could potentially grow on all the properties around it, why not? That's just sort of my understanding of the commission's rationale for that.
We don't, I'm not aware of any property that would be like that. Yeah, obviously, you know.
There could be. I don't know. I haven't done any
Okay,
research as to whether
it's
or not
okay.
there are.
It's not a,
I got to go back to the deviousness of somebody I know. Looks like it's built for somebody. There was somebody in mind when this decision was made. Why isn't that 10 acres? Why isn't that 2 acres? Why is it 5? It just seems a little bit odd.
Yeah, the urgency ordinance allowed someone to cultivate on a parcel as small as 2 acres.
That's correct.
And we have a lot of registrants or pending registrants on parcels of 5 and 10 acres. And I think it was an accommodation to those people that if there was a unique situation where that occurred, they felt it was okay. But
Do we have information regarding how many approved registrations have been on acreage size? Can that be obtained shortly?
we can obtain that information.
Could we put that in process and maybe
during
table
the
this
lunch
until we
hour,
get
I'll have my
that?
staff run a report, is what we've got as far as parcel size for approved registrations.
Can we, if we can get that done by 2 o'clock or something, we can table this?
Before we return after lunch, yes. we
Okay,
can do that.
thank you. Is that agreeable with the board? Great. That's what we'll do. Next issue.
So this, the next one is the canopy area, and this is 070E2, page 30 of alternative 1, page 31 of alternative 2. The board version doesn't really talk about whether or not someone who was registered for, say, 10 acres under the urgency ordinance, if they were to relocate to a conforming zone and parcel, could they grow more than what they registered for previously. The commission made it very clear that they could do that. So regardless of what they registered for previously, if they're going through all the hoops of re-registering on a different site, or even, the site they're on now conforms, they could grow up to the maximum of 22,000 square feet.
After being permitted
After being permitted, yes.
and approved.
And approved, and meeting all the criteria.
Questions of Mr. Mauer on that issue? Seeing none, call for a poll. Supervisor Clapp, we'll start with you.
No.
Supervisor Mills.
Yes.
Supervisor Toffenelli.
Yes.
Supervisor Garamendi.
So we're going for B2, the planning commission, I mean, one is silent, one is not.
Yeah, I think my intent was always done, if you're going to 50 acres, the maximum canopy is 22,000 feet. I think that's why it was.
That's what I would interpret
Yeah.
yours, but this is just clearer.
And I think I made that statement yesterday.
Your mic's not on. We can't
Mike.
hear you.
I'm sorry, Mike. I think that's why I wrote it in there, that my intent was always that if you're going to 50 acres or above, that 22,000 would be the max. And I think I made that statement yesterday when we were talking about another issue, about co-op things where they were gonna get together, 3 or 4 or 5 of them or whatever on a certain parcel, that as long as it didn't go over 22,000 feet, so.
You're in agreement with that, Supervisor Toffenelli? Supervisor Garamendi, you're in agreement?
So the language in B2 is clear.
Right, that's correct.
Okay.
I also agree. Board poll results is 4-1. Next issue, Mr. Mauer.
Can I bring up something real quick?
Sure, Mr.
Because we're
Clapp, you can
talking
do that
about,
anytime you want.
we're talking about 5 acres, and I believe we just adopted a 500-foot setback. Well, if you put a
No,
flat...
we tabled that, sir.
Oh, okay, because I was ready to bring it up, but if you put a plant in the middle of 5 acres and you go 500 each way around, you end up with, we're short, it doesn't mathematically figure out. You cannot do a 5 acres.
You
No,
need to have
understandable.
about 33 acres.
Yeah.
To meet a 500
33,
foot
yeah,
setback.
to make, and, yeah.
I think that's the one we tabled, right? Right. All right, we're going to readdress that, sir. Okay, next issue, sir.
Next issue is the outdoor setback. And this is OSONO E3 and 5, page 30 in alternative A and 31 in alternative B. The recommendation from the board was 500 feet. The planning commission recommended 200 feet with a variance procedure if it's not adjacent to residentially zoned parcels.
Mr. Chair, is it
Yes.
appropriate, can we even talk about this before we get to the acreage size? I mean, as Peter just pointed out, or Clyde just pointed out, it matters.
The math doesn't figure out, so I mean, we at least should keep in the math.
So can we do this without the other first? I don't know.
I think you have a point. You want to speak to that issue, Mr. Toffenelli?
I'm going to be firm either way, whatever lot size you go with. So I think there's a allowance in here. It also says a variance procedure if not adjacent to a residential.
That's right,
zone.
and that applies to both alternatives.
That applied and always has applied to both. So, it doesn't matter to me. I will not be voting for anything less than 50 acres. So it doesn't, you can address it whenever you want.
Supervisor Mills?
I would say just go ahead and go forward with the 500 feet, and we'll deal with the rest of it when it gets here.
Other comments?
I would say let's get on with the acreage and then we could do this other one. But
Well, if there's additional information that you need before you complete the discussion, maybe we combine the setback and acreage, after lunch discussion, and maybe we move on to the next couple of items, although we're pretty
Okay,
close to
let's-
wrapping things up, but I think.
Chair's
there's other-
decision is we're going to table this issue right now and move as suggested by Mr. Mauer.
So the next issue is whether or not there is a requirement that there be a dwelling on the property. The board recommendation was that there is a dwelling. The planning commission was concerned, well, why, if we're pushing this out to ag property, why are we requiring that they put a house on it? They felt that there needed to be a permitted structure, because you've got, housing of chemicals, you're gonna have processing going on, so there needed to be a permitted structure, but it could be like a shop structure or something like that, or some of the larger barns that are being used for the indoor activity associated with cultivation and processing. So they did not feel it was necessary to actually have a residence on the property. There was some discussion about having someone, within a certain distance as far as notification. So if there was an emergency, that there would be someone who could be on call, that would be in there, be there within a short period of time. Having a permanent residence doesn't necessarily mean that someone associated with the cultivation activity would necessarily be living in it. It could be rented out to someone entirely different. So that was their justification for saying they didn't feel a residence was required. They also provided a time frame. If people are going to be moving onto a new site, it's going to take a year or two to construct a house. The language that was drafted with alternative 1 basically says the house has to be there before you start cultivating. The planning commission said, well, if they're going to have to move all their cultivation activity and build a house, give them some time to do that. So they provided 12 months to file for the permit and get it issued, and 24 months to have it finalized.
To have what?
Have it finalized. So part of the problem that we're having, and that would be for any structure, what we've seen in some cases is someone applies for a permit, but they never follow through on it. They sort of meet the minimum requirement of applying for the permit, but 2 years later the permit expires and nothing's happened. So this ensures that they have to actually file it.
Supervisor Mills?
I understand the reasoning for a dwelling, but I think the more critical issue, and we've seen it over and over again during appeals processes, lack of restroom facilities. I mean, if there's anything that needs to be in this discussion, it's, you got 50 acres of ground, for gosh sakes, where's the restroom?
Everywhere.
I would rather that be the topic of discussion than whether or not there's a building on that property.
Well, we could certainly add provision that says any structure must contain and whatever.
Well, you can do that, or you can put, much like a construction zone, requiring porta potties to be there in the interim, and they be serviced. The concerns are, and we do have codes on the books as far as, even if this wasn't the case, how long you can camp out on a piece of property, how long you can have a trailer there. Those are all covered in other codes, but yet this particular type of operation isn't, when it gets to a certain point, somebody's going to be on that property 24 hours.
Yeah.
Whether they're guard, whatever they are, whether they're processing or whatever, and to be able to accommodate them to our codes, and not be living in substandard conditions is what this was about. And you can hear testimony from many other people, neighbors, and so the trailers have been on the property for years, and people are living on them, and there's no restroom facilities and so forth. That's what we're trying to avoid here. And if it is going to be a legitimate business, then there are requirements like any other business is. Whether you are there for 8 hours a day, 10 hours, you have the operation going 24 hours a day. You need the facilities to accommodate the people that are going to be on site and working in this business. And if it required a residence, I don't care, but it's going to need something for people to live in under standards, whether it's this time of year and they have to have shelter to go get warm. They have break times where they got to go in for shelter if it's raining outside, if they have to use the lavatory. All that has to be standard conditions, is what we're looking at. And if it takes a little bit of time, then the requirements would have to be that you have to have porta potties on there. You need to have some type of shelter for these people to take a break. Whatever the codes are, state code requirements on 2-hour breaks, and they have to have the ability to go somewhere and get warm or get cooled down because of the heat or what have you. That has to be provided as an employer.
That's absolutely right, and there are provisions that they must meet all of the standards for agricultural worker safety and sanitation. We had, pretty nasty appeal a couple weeks ago at the Planning Commission where those provisions were not met, and the Commission denied that appeal because it was clearly a health hazard and bad working conditions for those employees. So those are standards that must be met. There's a number of references to other sections of state and local laws as far as health requirements and employee requirements.
So we don't need to recreate the wheel here. There's already agricultural labor standards, OSHA, and all these things are already law.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
So the question then really comes down to if they're going to, they will have to have a place to house employees if they're living on site. Not everyone has employees that live on site, but some do. If they're going to do that, then they need to have, either residence or ag employee housing, whatever it might be that meets our codes. And if they're not there, they're not staying on site, maybe they, live nearby or they, commute in, whatever, but they still have to have sanitation provisions. And it could be met with porta potty and hand washing stations and, meet all the requirements of state and local health laws. And it has to be within a certain distance of where they're working and a certain number based on the number of employees. All of those standards would apply. But the question here is, do you want to require a permanent residence on the site or not require that and allow some other type of structure to house those facilities?
Well, I think what Supervisor Toffenelli put here is quite applicable only because of what happened with that particular site was in my district. And how quickly did it devolve into what staff considered third world standards. So to keep us out of that and having a demonstrable dwelling or refuge or safety location for employees is critical to not letting camping or other things start to suddenly happen, which can create massive problems.
Yeah.
And our staff's ability then to how do we monitor that, how do we get out there and do the inspections, et cetera, is solved with what Supervisor Toffenelli has put in his recommendation. And I think it is more strict and more complete than what the Planning Commission said. I'll be supporting what you wrote.
Okay. I'm going to take some liberty here as board chair. I see the need and the recommendation made by the Planning Commission. And it's my understanding that should the Planning Commission's recommendation be selected to be our ordinance, there's a 5-year sunset clause that's been mentioned here. So if someone's going to invest in a business, invest in building a residence on that business within 2 years, that shows a dedication to be successful. Comparing that with an existing residence being mandatory on a plot, I think that kind of stymies what we need to really focus on what we want to do, and that's be successful, not only in our business adventures, but as a county too. We have a habit of making things so restrictive that we prevent any type of progress whatsoever. And I'm not just addressing the cannabis issue, folks. I'm addressing the entire history of counties in our situation. I think we're putting up roadblocks to allow us to do that. And I think that by adopting the Planning Commission's recommendation, that shows a dedication to what they really want to do with this county. And I'm talking about everybody in the county, folks. I'm not talking about just growers. I'm not talking about people that are banned. I'm talking about everybody. we take one step forward and then fall back two. I think we need the opportunity to proceed. So I would agree with the Planning Commission's recommendation that it makes that dedication to that endeavor and to build that house, obtaining it, proper permits, building it legally, and inspecting it. Now we have another layer where we can actually enforce our cannabis laws in conjunction with the laws of this county. So that's my 2 cents. Supervisor Gerber?
If I could weigh in, I want to start out by saying I don't think we need to have a house under every oak tree in Calaveras County. I like our open spaces, and it's a lot easier to take down a greenhouse or a corral than remove a house. It's generally there. I think that, what we do, if we require someone to have a residence at the time of application for cultivation, we have taken a pool, a property, and shrunk it down even tighter. And I think that in essence, nobody can be expected to have a 50-acre lot or a 100-acre lot or a 2,000-acre lot and get a house built in time for this upcoming year, or maybe even not even next year. We don't have the building industry we did a decade ago in this county. I mean, you're waiting a long time to find a contractor these days, which is great. They're all working. That's good. So I think that what we'd be doing is we'd be, I don't think it's practical as a practical means. So I would encourage us to stick with what the Planning Commission said, put forward. It's a shop, it's a structure. They have to obey all the laws. They have to have restrooms. They have to have shelter, and let people move forward.
I would add one thing. This is for our legal, certified, registered growers. The unregistered outlaw, if you will, does not apply. They will not follow the rule. Let's make it so it's workable for folks that want to be legal and be part of this county, and effectively go after those that violate those laws. Comments?
Yeah, I do.
Supervisor Clapp?
There's a gentleman in Gary's district. He has a olive mill, and he does that. He has a house on the property, and he put a facility in to make olive oil. Well, to do that, since he wasn't growing pot, he had to follow the regulations like everyone else in the world does. He had to put bathroom facilities in it, even though he had the house there, and he's the one that actually operates the mill. I think you know who I'm talking about. But he had to put kitchen facilities in for breaks. He had to put a bathroom in, and that. So if we're wanting to give all the exemptions for the marijuana, please give them to me too, because I'm a builder, and I don't get these. I mean, if I build a house, I'm allowed to put a trailer on there if I get a permit for a year while I'm building a house. So we have these facilities already. We're talking about we can't get the people. So the codes are on the books already. So let them compete on open ground like the contractors do, or the person that wants to put an olive press in, or, I see just these big exemptions because we're trying to get this industry in here, that we're not making them go to the same standards as the other people that has businesses in this county.
I understand, Mr. Clapp, but I fail to see the exemption issue here. If you're going to build a house, you better follow all the rules and laws. Nobody's giving an exemption on building homes.
Well, we're actually giving an exemption on this because we're letting them do a business on it and stuff. Okay, it's ag, but we're saying, okay, he's going to get 2 years to do a house. I get a year on my permit to build a house. I don't get 2 years, and I have to have an inspection the first 6 months on the project. If I don't have that inspection on the first 6 months, I lose my permit. So
Okay.
why are we getting the exemption for them to build a house on their property?
Now I see your point.
And it should be the same for everybody.
And
Change it to a year.
I'd like to chime in for just a second on this issue. And Mr. Clapp is correct. And I wouldn't mind putting a provision in here to address some of that, but you can get a modular home bought and put up really, really quick and get a septic system in, find a place that perks, and put it in really, really quick, not even close to a year. 90 days. Those are out there and they're meant for that to be put up. We're talking about a permanent resident in a modular home is a permanent, once it's set and in place, can be a permanent home with a septic system and everything that's included in a residence to keep either air conditioned and keep them cool, a place for them to cool off, or warm, and a place for them to have a break room and a break facility. We're not talking about jumping through hoops or reinventing the wheels here again, but we are putting in some conditions that any other business has on them. You can say this is ag, and you can say whatever you want. It's not a vineyard, it's not an apple orchard or an almond orchard, because those people spend their time and they go home to their homes. There are going to be people on here 24/7 because of the nature of this business. And when you have natures of these businesses, there is security that is in place, and you have to have some place for those securities or the people working 24/7 there to go. And it has to be, I can't open a business, or anybody can't open any business, I don't care what it is, until you provide those facilities. That is what the law states.
I agree. I don't question the law. I just would rather not have those buildings being rolled in from Woodland and unloaded as a modular home. I'd rather have a good construction by people who are living and working here, pouring the concrete and swinging the hammers, and have jobs.
And that's still a possibility. I don't care which way they go.
But they won't be able to get it done quickly. Things just don't happen that quick.
Supervisor Mills?
On average, I mean, if you really had to push it, you could put a modular in with a septic, et cetera, in about 90 days. I mean, you really had to push it, you could. I've seen it done. So I would like to poll the board on which way we're going to go. I think we pretty much understand what the
I
situation
mean,
is.
we've done, being in the Butte Scar, we've seen a lot of modular homes, and it's pretty rare to get a permit in 90 days.
Any further discussion? Gentlemen, please. Thank you. Any further discussion? And we'll poll the board. Supervisor Tofinelli?
What are we polling for?
Your poll, your request. Whether or not we're going to
accept-
accept the planning commission's recommendation, or the existing recommendation by alternate number one, where it has to have an existing residence. Is that correct, Mr. Mauer?
I would poll the board just on accepting A1, number 6 first, and then if that passes, then we're done. If not, we can poll
Okay,
again.
we can
for
do
the
that.
other.
We can do that. Everybody understand what the poll's involving? We'll start with Supervisor Mills.
Yes.
Supervisor Tofinelli.
Yes.
Supervisor Garamendi.
No.
Supervisor Clapp.
Yes.
Supervisor Oliveira? No. Poll will
So we're
indicate that
sticking
we're
with
going to
the
go with
alternate
alternate
one
one.
language for that provision.
Yeah. Give you a second, sir.
So the last item on my list then was discussion of the setback for indoor cultivation. And the difference here is, this is on page 33 of alternative A and 34 of alternative B, 070F3 for those sections. 200-foot setback under the board recommendation, and 100-foot setback under the planning commission. This is for indoor cultivation on industrial land.
Comments? Anybody wish to speak to that issue?
Gary, what was your reasoning?
Well, this item came up, and when I came up with this particular section, I was concerned about, and I had some conversations with Peter, where the existing ones are, and they're the ones that are in industrial. that we were talking about and what property lines, how far setback from property lines they were existing. And if people even knew that they existed. I think his comment to me was that most of the, what we have 4 that are existing in industrial and 1 with an application in now.
I believe that's right.
Yeah, that most everybody don't even know they exist because they're so well run. They have filtration systems. So this is not, I can go to 100 feet. That's fine with me. I am going to hold with the separate septic tank system that the water needs to be tested though when we get to that point. But the 100 feet, you know, as long as they're a well-run operation and that for the most part, you wouldn't know what's going on inside there, it's fine with me.
Supervisor Garamendi, any comments?
I'm fine with 100 feet.
Supervisor Clapp?
No.
Supervisor Mills?
Based upon what Supervisor Tofinelli said, I would say yes.
I would even go 75 feet, to be quite honest with you. I've had the opportunity to view these operations. They are in industrial. I'll go with 100 feet, but I'm going to recommend 75 feet, but I think I'm going to be on the losing end of that. But if it's done correctly, I think that would meet all the criteria put forth by the public and put forth by our regulations. Would anybody consider 75 feet? No. Okay. 100 feet, then it is.
So that we've tabled a few things till afternoon, we can get some more information. There were a couple things that we tabled yesterday, and I don't know if we want to bring those back up at this point. One was the discussion of self-distribution. And we also,
I had actually wrote that down.
something else we tabled earlier. I think that's, what was that? Right, the cap item, and I think that's linked with the parcel size issue, so.
I'm going to interject here. Staff, I'm going to give you a 10-minute break here. We're going to go another hour. Would that be okay, Mr. Maurer?
Fine with me?
Everybody needs to stand up, shake it out, and take a break, and we'll be back in about 15 minutes. Make it 15, folks.
It's your Halloween cup.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Once again, we're going to be breaking at 12:30 for lunch. I do want to make one quick announcement, and it's to my fellow board members and staff. Gentlemen and ladies, please speak into the microphone. We're having difficulty not being heard, not only in our gallery here, but also in our microphones for our live stream TV. At this point, I understand, Mr. Maurer, you have something you want to address?
Okay, so we were talking briefly about the errata. There was an additional provision that was included in this two-page sheet that I sent you last night, and everyone has a copy of additional errata that we had discovered yesterday and going through some of the changes that the Environmental Management Agency Director had suggested. I would recommend that be included as well. The other point was that when we added the greenhouse gas reduction mitigation measure to the Planning Commission alternative, I inadvertently didn't include it in alternative A, so that should also be in alternative A. The language is the same. It's mitigation to address greenhouse gases. So unless there's any concerns, or we just want to make sure that whatever the final action, that these errata, these corrections are made to address those things. I think probably the next thing we should do then is Supervisor Mills had a list of issues, concerns, questions that we could sort of briefly go through. And I...
Is that a written form?
Pardon me?
Have something written?
I made a couple copies for staff here, but I assume that maybe you'd pass it out to the rest of the board members.
Okay, if it's been submitted to staff, we'll need me to provide copies for all the board members and the public. So I wish I would have known
So,
that before our
we,
break, but can we make copies, Madam Clerk?
Staff,
Okay.
we can do it another way, because I would like to go through Mr. Tofinelli's ordinance with some possible alternative pieces.
Supervisor Mills, I believe that once we submitted that
No,
to
this was not-
staff, do we need to provide as a public document, counsel?
This was not submitted to staff.
Let me answer counsel, please.
When I haven't received a copy of it, so it hasn't been submitted into the record.
Okay,
Nor has the board clerk received it, so it has not been submitted into the record.
okay.
We can certainly make copies at lunch, potentially provide that to the staff, or to the public, and to the remainder of those on the dais. For purposes of at least timeliness, we only have 45 minutes until we break for lunch. We can at least start the discussion and then rotate the information as soon as we get back from lunch.
Okay. Thank you, counsel. Your choice, Supervisor Mills. What would
Well,
you
the
like-
list that you are referring to, yes, that should come to the board so that, and the public, so everybody can see what that is prior to discussion. I have no
Okay.
problem with that. But
We
the
can
other,
take time and make copies right now?
well, the other piece is, this is a separate document that I have in front of me that I spent some time going through and making some strikeouts and some changes as to whether or not the board would make some considerations to what those changes might be, would be subject to discussion.
Okay, counsel, does that change the situation at all? Okay, then we can go ahead and review that information and provide copies during lunch for the public and the remaining board members?
As far as the list that he already provided to the staff at the table, yes, but from what I'm gathering is that he just has a few checklists of things that he would like to discuss from his own personal notes on the A1 plan that's before the board now. Am I correct?
You are correct.
What would you like to do, Supervisor Mills?
It might be easier just, because this should go fairly quickly as far as what I have as proposed changes to Supervisor Tofinelli's plan. And we can follow along in A1 for those that have a copy of it. 1795.030B. This would be on your page 8.
Okay.
We're talking about when are we going to render existing applications invalid? And when do they terminate and render invalid? And there is nothing in statute that says that we have to give 90 days from the effective date of an ordinance. We could make that 60 days, 30 days, or upon enactment. So my question would be, do you want to go 90 days with that length of time in B, or would you like to tighten it up?
What I think the 90-day reference is to what was in the urgency ordinance that said 90 days. That's the reference to it.
So we're dealing with the unprocessed active applications currently under the UO in the planning department. Is that correct, Mr. Mauer? Is that what this is referencing?
This provision says that any activity that was allowed, either through an issued registration or the fact that they could cultivate under an application pending status, upon the enaction of this ordinance, the effective date of this ordinance, they would have 90 days to continue until they have to shut down. That is consistent with what was in the urgency ordinance that said that that would be, that any ability to cultivate on the urgency ordinance would cease after permanent ordinance is adopted, and you've got 30 days for the ordinance to become effective and then 90 days to comply with whatever new provisions there are. That's why we carried that 90 days over, to be consistent with what the growers are utilizing now and understanding that they had 90 days after the effective date of whatever was adopted, whether it be a ban or a new regulatory ordinance.
The purpose for the discussion is to allow the staff to, in essence, shut down the application pending process and not continue to process.
That's something that I think we need to discuss with, internally with county council and the CAO as far as the effective way to wrap that program up. Particularly if someone who is a registrant and there will be potential limitation on their ability to relocate. Someone who happened to have been an early a registrant that got their permit issued, and someone who, for whatever reason, we haven't quite got to it yet. There's some outstanding issues we haven't looked at. We would want to try to wrap that up, and we will do everything we can to finish that so that those who shouldn't be approved won't be approved, and those who are will be, so we can clearly communicate with the state, and we have a clear record of those who qualified under our urgency ordinance provision, because that's one of the criteria in order to continue to operate, is that you qualify under our criteria. So it's our intent to wrap that up in that time frame.
So maybe what we're doing is discussing something we want to talk about in closed session as to how we would develop that process to some degree.
I don't know, not necessarily closed session, but I think it's more of an administrative process of what we need to do and have the resources to do it. This provision of the code basically is just saying, you've got to shut down after 90 days.
They
Doesn't
still need
matter
a
where
new
you're at.
permit. They
still
still need a
One at
new
a time,
permit.
folks. Let's let Mr. Maurer finish, and
So-
county council will get there.
If they don't have a permit within 90 days after the effective date, and I think with everything, all the requirements, that's going to be very, very difficult for anyone to have a permit within 90 days. They're going to have to cease operations, period, after 90 days, whether we've completed the review process or not. That's what this provision states.
Okay.
So it really isn't addressing what we do internally. This says cultivator who's operating under the urgency ordinance must cease operations 90 days after the effective date. And that was carried over from the urgency ordinance. It said 90 days after the effective date of adoption of a new ordinance, this provisions of this, it becomes null and void, and you can't operate under these provisions anymore.
No, I understand that. It's just, it's not required to be 90 days. We're simply carrying forward something from the UO.
That might be something that we might want to discuss in closed session.
Okay.
I'll chime in here. I had many, many discussions on this with council and Peter on this provision. And we came to the consensus that this was appropriate. That's why I had it put in there at 90 days. I was like you. I wanted to do it within 30 days. But they pointed out several items to me. One being the provisions of the urgency ordinance and the statement that's in it pertaining to 90 days. And as Peter said, they'll have to shut down within 90 days and conform to whatever other than the provisions that we provided in this ordinance as we went through it. And one of those is the retaining of their generic plants inside a building that we discussed earlier. That certainly wouldn't be part of this closing down in 90 days. So they would have to conform to all these items and shut down basically the other portion, the commercial operations on their business to conform with this.
Ms. Moss, thank you for being patient. You had comments?
I think it was covered. I just wanted to make sure that the board understood that just because we would continue to process urgency ordinance applications to see if they would qualify for a future permit under the new provisions doesn't mean that they would be allowed to operate under the urgency ordinance. And there is a separate permit requirement that we would be, as Supervisor Tofinelli stated, so.
Okay, and so that resolves that issue. Some of the other things that I'd highlighted, we'd already dealt with, such as the type of residence, temporary dwellings, et cetera. 1795-040 in A, It refers to this provision shall apply to cannabis cultivation by a nursery, but shall not apply to cannabis cultivation by a dispensary. Do we really need to have that statement in there? Because it's already stated in 1795 or 1791. It's kind of a duplicate statement. Because we've already permitted, or what we're going to do with 1791 is already there. Do we have to have this here?
I don't think you have to have it in there. It just was to make it, if people were looking at this section for anything to do with cultivation, right now we don't have the dispensary ordinance. I know there was direction to bring it back with updates, and so this might add clarification until we come back with that Malcursa compliant dispensary ordinance. So, but do I think it's necessary? Not necessarily. Again, it was just put in there for clarification under the circumstances.
Okay, the other pieces that I would like to look at has to do with the Prop 64 section. I'm trying to find out where that is in Supervisor Tofanelli's. That would be personal. Because what I'd like to look at potential adding in here is we talk about soil mulch amendments, pesticides, herbicides. I don't know, it's number 16 on the list, on my list, but I don't know where it is.
Tell me what page you're on?
I don't know what page I'm on A1.
The operating standards for
Is that where it is?
non-commercial personal use would be on page 23.
There we go.
It's 070B, non-commercial cultivation.
So we're talking about the soil mulch, that would be number 8 on page 22 of A1. And it states soil and mulch amendments, pesticides, herbicides, rodenticides, fungicides, fertilizers, and other hazardous materials shall be used, stored, and disposed of in full compliance with state, federal, and local laws. I would like to change that to only those listed by the Department of Pesticide Regulation are permitted for storage and use on site, and all chemicals used shall be labeled as approved for use on cannabis.
What is the difference?
Well, the Department of Pesticide Regulation clearly defines what chemicals are permitted, and those that want to do this right are already using those chemicals. So I want to be sure that we're only allowing chemicals on site that are approved by the Department of Pesticide Regulation, and that any other chemicals shall not be in that area.
Well, we've got, you've got Department of Agriculture monitors some of this stuff as well. So wouldn't that all come under the full compliance with federal, state, and local laws?
Well, the Department of Pesticide Regulation sets what chemicals are
I understand
permitted.
what DPR is.
Yes.
I'm just saying that there are things on here that are not regulated by DPR.
Such as
Mulch.
soil and mulch
Amendments.
and
right.
amendments.
Yeah, that's correct.
Fertilizers.
That's correct. They're separately.
So what are we trying to amend here? Seems like it covers it.
They're under ag.
I see that the way it's stated here, under federal, state, and local laws. I mean, that's a pretty encompassing umbrella. And I think if we try to restrict it, we're kind of tying our hands in some areas. We could be.
Okay.
Counsel, you need to speak. I know you do.
I don't know if Supervisor Tofanelli is aware of this. I should probably make the rest of you aware. There have been questions with the Ag Commissioner and with Mr. Banner about how much the state occupies the field when it comes to pesticide regulation. We went back and forth on a bunch of language. We actually got a DPR attorney on the phone and vetted this particular provision through him. And I think that it does require, just the language that we have in there, requires automatically that they comply with the state's pesticide regulations. The state pesticide agency did not want anything limited to a particular list. They felt that that was not something that was supportable.
we had many discussions on this, and did call in expert from the state. And I questioned a number of things on it and pertaining to the state and what we could and couldn't do. And many things, there's a disclaimer, if you go to this section in the state code, which I believe is 14, was it 7? Whatever it is, no, it's 1100, starts at 1100. It specifically states in there that that it's preempt. Any local laws does not preempt their laws and what they have on the books. I even questioned, and it was on Wednesday or Tuesday when Kevin was here, I asked about what an enclosure is. They say it must be a locked enclosure. Well, I wanted to put in the code saying that it must be a secured building, it must pass UBC codes. And we asked that question, and they said it would preempt. So this is something we spent a lot of time on, believe me, and we decided that the best way to tackle it would be state and federal and local laws when it comes to this particular area right here, because the state on pesticides has a lock hold on it.
And not only that, but they will be probably changing or altering those laws as we go along, which may require us then to come back if we be too restrictive and have to rewrite a section of our ordinance to refit what they've got.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're in agreement of language?
We're in agreements on that. I would like to talk about the possibility of power, because I know generators have been kind of a sore subject. Is there anything in our current A1 ordinance that defines that power shall be supplied from a utility and that the use of generators to power cultivation activities is prohibited?
Yes. The only thing that allows for use of a generator would be as an emergency backup, and then it would have to meet the enclosure and soundproofing requirements of the urgency ordinance.
Okay. Talking about a legal water source, because I know the water tender issue has gone on. At some point, the county may want to come back with a discussion on a dry well ordinance, modeling it somewhat after Tuolumne County, and that how do we deal with the overtaking of water within a specific zone and be sure that we're not impacting the rest of the neighbors with that water consumption, because the state is very clear that they want, the governor's order is 20% reduction in domestic use by 2025. And that doesn't preclude that they aren't going to step that into agricultural use as well. And some of the ag people in the valley are already thinking it will, because they're looking at the possibility of monitoring or metering wells, ag wells in the valley as part of the Bay Delta plan. So my thought is that might be something that we want to discuss somewhere in the future as to how we deal with that.
Is it, I'm not sure if it's possible to require drip. What's the difference between drip and regular irrigation? How much water does drip irrigation save versus regular irrigation?
That's interesting, because when you talk about nut farms in the valley, they're saying that the flood style of irrigation that they do is a groundwater recharge, and that it only impacts as good as you can get to the root zone. Once you get beyond the root zone, it's of no value at all. It's just a recharge. So drip irrigation literally does not help the root zone, because you don't get the water below it to percolate back up over time. So it is not always a true beneficial. It depends on the soil type, and I'm sure that if Brian Moss was here, he could help explain it too. But all of that can be played into it, because a lot of your grape producers are using drip irrigation now. So that might be something that we'd want to look at. I'm not asking for it today, but I think that we need to have that conversation as to how are we going to be sure that we're protecting the wells of the neighbors from overproduction, and to what impact would it have? I mean, if we suddenly dry up a whole series of wells around a particular parcel, then everybody's feeling the effects, and I want to be sure that we have something in code that deals with it.
So the effect of groundwater or the impact on groundwater was an issue that was addressed in the EIR. And there was a mitigation measure that was proposed that required monitoring. I worked with Brad Banner, the Environmental Management Agency Director, and he felt that that provision wasn't really that effective. And section 060H on page 20 was the alternative measure that he recommended. And unfortunately, he's not here to sort of go through the detail, but what he told me was that he calculated based on sort of the maximum amount of water that would be used for a 20-acre or a 22,000 square foot cultivation area, and what the well production would need to be in order to sustain that. The provisions of this section say that we will do, before it's approved, they have to demonstrate that there's sufficient groundwater to support that, and we would provide the opportunity for any nearby property owners, I think he said within 500 feet, to ask their well to be tested at the same time. So a drawdown test would be taken with a certain maximum draw that would be used that would demonstrate long-term capacity of that fractured groundwater system to support it, and to see if it adversely affects someone else. And that addresses that issue. I'm pretty comfortable in the work that Brad did on that, this would work to address concerns that a lot of people address as far as the potential drawdown of adjacent wells. We don't have the same, water table situation for the most part that the valley does. There's a small section of the county that has a part of the East San Joaquin groundwater basin, but for the most part, we're a fractured rock system. You don't know the interconnectedness between that. You could sink two wells close to each other and they're totally independent, and you could affect someone else, further away. You can get a total dry well and move 100 feet away and come up with a gusher. So it's a very hit and miss kind of system, as anyone who has a well in most of the county knows, that sometimes you can get really good production. So this provision requires testing before the permit is issued, and to demonstrate that they won't affect nearby wells.
Okay. What I'm talking about, though, is that eventually, should they affect nearby wells, that we need to possibly in the future discuss a dry well ordinance, and what steps will the county take to help mitigate that, or to help the neighbors as well as that affected parcel to gain some sense of recovery.
Mr. Mauer, I have a question.
Yeah.
Is the procedure we're talking about, is that incorporated in any other agricultural product? Is this a procedure accepted by the agricultural world to check the drawdown on wells for?
This is not something that I'm aware of it's required in this county.
In the valley it is.
In the valley, maybe.
We should make sure that if we have that broader discussion, as Supervisor Mills has suggested, that we bring in all different types of water use.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'm sure that it would be a very exciting conversation when we talk about everybody else who uses water in addition to cannabis.
No question about it. We discussed in the dispensaries about washable surfaces and impermeable floors.
Right.
Yet we didn't bring any of that into our indoor grow requirements. I know that there are counties that have done that because they were wanting to mitigate the mold issues or the potentials, that there'd be no carpet in that particular area is one thing that they were stating. Is there something that we can incorporate to make a statement that the indoor grow area has to be constructed of a washable surfaces and impermeable floor, and that specifically no carpet is to be permitted?
I suppose we could. I would suspect that any indoor cultivation is probably more concerned about mold than we are. But I don't know what those standards would be. And that maybe if we want to...
We could duplicate what we stated in 17.91.
I think if there's sort of a generic provision that we could put in there without getting too specific as
Correct.
to exactly what kind.
Let's just go back to 1791, drag what we said there in and put it into 1795.
What is the page on 1791? That you're referring to?
That was the draft dispensary ordinance that we looked at. I don't.
So we want to drag that over to this one?
That's what I'm hearing Supervisor Mills
No,
suggest.
I want to know what that says. I don't have 1791.
Yeah.
But language that would minimize the potential for mold and surfaces that would collect moisture and things like that.
Do you want to bring 1791 section back after lunch so that the rest of the board has a chance to see what that statement is? So we can poll on it.
We can poll on that if you'd like.
And
Everybody
do-
understand the request for the poll?
To bring
do you wanna-
Bring
1791.
1791 to compare the language to be inserted to 1795, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions on that before the
I mean,
poll?
we could be just directed to do that if you want to see it, but if you're comfortable with the language that you developed for that, we can certainly just add that to the final draft.
Why don't we do that after lunch?
Okay.
Bring a copy so we can all see it and
Okay.
make a decision.
Yeah, I'd like to see the ordinance, so we know exactly what we're dragging over and dropping in.
Yeah, I mean, our primary concern needs to be health and safety, but this is an ag production thing. I mean, how much detail do we need to get into people's lives? It's fine, we'll look at it after lunch.
Take a look at it.
We had discussed about the odors, and I know up to this point, we really haven't said too much about it. But odors, is there some way that we can put a statement in there that odors shall not emanate from a parcel to adjacent parcels? Because that's been one of the complaints that we've had very consistently in our discussions, and does it rise to the level of a nuisance code violation, or exactly how would the board want to deal with it?
So just so I'm clear, you're proposing that we mandate that odor cannot pass over property lines? Is that, I'm just curious, from an outdoor grow?
No,
Well,
this
I-
is
I
indoor.
think- Let
Physically
me
possible?
address it this way. I did a lot of research on all of this ordinance, believe me. I spent an inordinate amount of time in a lot of Julie, she's giving me a face. The 500-foot setback that I required is to address the odor situation. And that's why, especially even if they're going up against Ag 1 or General Forestry or these other open areas, that it would still provide somewhat of a barrier. Then we went to the residential. When you butt up against residential areas where there's a possibility of people having homes there, what have you, that we went the route with getting clearance from the neighbors, because they'll be very well aware of what's going there and being able to chime in whether they're for or against the odor, or they don't want it there, or what have you. I think that was addressing those issues as far as the odor went, and we had many discussions on this, on that issue, because I had a concern for it too, because as you know, as a supervisor and the other ones too, it's one of the major complaints we have when the phone rings or the email comes up. That and some of the provisions about the housing and so forth and what's going on over there. So that was to address that. And the 500-foot setback, addressing even having to, if there's a house close by on adjoining property, whether it's ag or what have you, or AP, whatever, that neighbor should be notified also for any objections. And that was to eliminate, get it out, get it on 50-plus acres, get it out, get it where it's not in residential areas, where everybody agrees it doesn't belong because of that, and other issues too, that this would address that.
Well, I was primarily dealing with the Prop 64 element.
Oh, and the Prop 64, not the commercial area.
Correct. So I'd like to have some thought about, how do we control that issue? We said something about the outdoor section and setbacks, et cetera, but we didn't speak to the indoor, or we didn't speak to how we deal with odors from indoor.
On the 12 plants or 6 plants that we're going to
Yeah.
allow outdoor.
Right.
And the odor issue. you know, there's many ideas I guess you could come up with. I don't know how big of an area is required to grow 6 plants, maybe somebody out here, or even 12 hours. What square footage are we talking about to accommodate that? And since we're putting a fence...
Supervisor Tofinelli, maybe Dr. Papano-Smith can answer that. He's the indoor successful cultivator, I guess.
Now, I wouldn't want to say you
Just
limit
address,
it-
just address the question.
And you're on the record, so...
Yes, sir. And let's be clear on what the question is, one more time.
I don't know what the square footage is necessary to grow 6 outdoor plants, or even up to 12 that we're allowing for a caregiver on an outdoor property. How
Well,
big
I-
of an area, square footage?
Well, I'm not the right person to speak to about outdoor, but if you're speaking about indoor, it really depends on the grower. You can put 6 plants and let them get really big and you know, have it in 100 square feet or so. When I started, and I'm not saying you should make this the
A 10 by
rule.
10?
When I started years ago, I had 6 plants in an 8x4 tent with 1 light and 1 fan plugged in the wall, no issues.
Okay, so there, see, that's what I'm talking about, is the
Yeah,
indoor.
Mr. Supervisor Mills, hold on a minute, please. Is there anybody that, from any opposition position, that is qualified to provide an answer for that same question? I want to make sure we have the same opportunity for both sides of this argument. Okay, seeing none, Supervisor Tofinelli, did that answer your question?
Yeah, he's saying he had 6 plants in 100 square feet, or less than 4 by 8, less than 100 square feet. So if you're going up to 12 outdoors and they're in a 200 square foot piece of property, which is 10 by 20 in a fenced area, would it be possible at certain time that they'd have to put a cover over the top of it, like make it to like a greenhouse where it's, you know, it's not opaque or anything and you're not using lights, but you at least have it contained? It'd be like a greenhouse situation, more or less, with a fence and then some type of clear cover over the top of it.
Okay. Supervisor Mills? thank
Yeah,
you for being
I
patient.
thought, I was not really addressing the outdoor, because the outdoor we had addressed with the setbacks and neighbor agreements, et cetera. I'm talking more about the indoor, and is there
Odor?
odors emanating from an indoor grow that, you know, do we want to address anything about remediation, or is there remediation methods that could be incorporated so that they can continue to do it without affecting the neighbor? Because there's no setback issue with that.
I don't think by state law they're allowed to do it indoors, so I'm not, maybe county council can chime in.
So we can impose reasonable regulations on indoor. I guess where I'm confused is if we're allowing outdoor, where there will be more likely to be an odor than there will be from indoor. I'm confused on, so you're suggesting we should require indoor to have filtration, but still allow also outdoor with no filtration? I'm not.
Well, we addressed the no filtration by providing setbacks or agreements with neighbors. We haven't addressed odors emanating from a residence itself, which could be, if you look at a 30-foot setback between the neighbor's boundaries, it could be less than that in some cases, where you got houses very tightly together and somebody's growing Prop 64 in the house next door to you, where there is a potential for odors emanating, which if we don't say something about it, there is no control mechanism to help offset what that neighbor's impact is. And I just want to be sure we have a discussion about how are we going to then require, if we get complaints, where they're going to have to do some type of remediation or odor control within those residences, or are we just going to let it go?
I have a question, counsel. Does the state statute address any odor issues on personal cultivation?
No.
Under
For-
Prop 64?
There's no requirements, it's at the local level when it comes to the non-commercial grows, as far as I understand. I do think you're allowed to impose reasonable regulations. I didn't realize or know that having that few plants would actually create an odor, but maybe I'm wrong. So if it does, then yes, you could require filtration.
Are you aware of any county ordinance involving nuisance that would fall into this category?
Good question.
Question for county council?
Odor
I mean,
If nuisance is nuisance,
well, I mean, there's private nuisance, I mean, for the county, a violation of our land use ordinance is how we define a nuisance. And so if there's a nuisance between neighbors, they have remedies privately. But as far as what constitutes a nuisance generally for the county, it would depend on what ordinance we put in place. So we could define, I mean, if odors can emanate from 6 plants, I don't think there's anything prohibiting the board from requiring filtration if it wants to do that.
I think we've got that issue covered under state law, and I think we've got it covered under our county ordinances regarding nuisances, which is going to be, as you stated, between 2 individuals, and the burden of proof is going to be in the pudding on that. I understand Supervisor Mills' ability to question all this, and it's good we are discussing it, but we have to be reasonable.
I think it's a policy call for the board. It's not so much a legal issue.
Supervisor Mills, do you have anything in mind that you would like to propose?
Well, the proposal would be is that as long as there is no odors emanating that create a nuisance code problem, that it's fine. But where you have, I think we need to have a mechanism in place as a policy matter from the board as to how we will assist in being that buffer with neighbors so they don't end up in court with each other, that we just simply have a policy in place that says, no, you need to remediate it if there's an issue. We're talking about residences that are very tightly packed together, and we know this is going to happen. There's going to be some rub and some bump up as people start to grow in residences.
The difficulty with odor regulation is, some people think something smells good and others can't stand it. And so you get a very subjective matter and very difficult to enforce. I would prefer actually to have a standard to meet, filtration requirement, whatever it is, than try to enforce a provision that utilizes some type of judgment call. I mean, there's language you can use of, odors offensive to people with, normal sensitivity, but what does that mean? I think that just really puts us down a path that just creates a lot of neighborhood dispute, and that we get stuck in the middle trying to resolve something that we have no ability to decide, does that smell okay or not?
Yeah, it's not a matter of trying to develop something subjective and exactly how do you do a smell test. I mean, I agree, I understand, I agree with that. But I don't want to have the free use and enjoyment of a neighbor's property reduced simply because of what they see as a potential conflict. And that if we can have some type of a policy statement in place, I think it would help to resolve that up front rather than on the backside.
Well, I think this might be an issue for a poll of the board, if you so desire, Supervisor Mills.
Certainly.
We can do that now.
Certainly.
I'd like to chime in first on something.
Okay, go ahead, Supervisor.
Is most people here are aware that litigation was brought against me to stop me from voting on this. This came from the pot industry, and in their complaint they filed against me, they said that if I had a pot farm next to me within 500 feet, my property would be drastically reduced in price, and that would be my financial gain for my vote. So from their own industry, they say that if you're within 500 feet, your property will be reduced, and I believe County Council has that complaint. So I would like to enter that into the record on their own statement on the effect that pot farm has onto neighboring properties. That's from them, that's not from me.
Understand. Thank you, sir. Any further comments before I poll?
Well, we're going to poll on whether we're going to require a filtration system, an odor filtration system for all indoor grows that are either caregiver or personal.
I would rather not do that right now. I'd rather that we instruct staff to look at a policy statement that could be incorporated maybe sometime in the future. It doesn't even have to be, what we do today, but at least to have that conversation and start to develop some data as to exactly what it is and how would we deal with it.
Okay, so Supervisor Mills, you're requesting a poll.
Yes,
Is that the basis of
that
your
would be
poll?
the basis of the poll.
Okay, any further discussion on that? I have some comments on that. I think it's a waste of resources and staff of time to even look into that issue because we do have nuisance ordinances and we have no standards that we can apply that to. I have to take a look at this from a law enforcement point of view or a code compliance point of view. How can we expect a responding deputy or a code compliance officer to make a decision on what smells good, what smells bad, and the quantity of the smell? If we can get some standards developed by the state, then we have some basis to take a look at. Right now, we have nothing to say what's legal or what's illegal, if you will. After having said that, any comments to that? If not, we'll call for the poll.
Okay, is the poll, you guys are getting me confused here. Now, the poll is if we're going to put air scrubbers on indoor,
Have staff
Personal
look into it.
grows,
that's
air
what,
scrubbers? No, we're talking, the poll consists of, correct me if I'm wrong, Supervisor Mills, whether or not we want staff to investigate or look into, we need to develop some type of ordinance control over a 6-plant indoor Prop 64 personal grow. And that to establish any orders emitting from that location, quasi indoor grow house. Is that what we're talking about? Is that, that's it?
That's it.
I got it right?
Darn.
Hey, cool.
I would,
Any confusion on that?
Want to talk?
yeah.
Then we'll start with the
Wait,
poll.
wait,
Supervisor,
Mayor.
I'm sorry.
I think, I don't know if this is a time for talking about it, but I'm for an open conversation on how we're going to regulate the 6 plants. I mean, if we're going to put some type of barcode with them where they get a permit for it, I think that discussion the board should have still, but I don't know if this is the proper time.
After the poll.
After the poll, but I think we're addressing the Prop 64, personal grow, no commercial.
No.
All right, any further questions? I'll conduct a poll. Supervisor Tofinelli.
Not at this time, no.
Supervisor Garamendi.
No.
Supervisor Platt.
Not at this time.
Supervisor Mills.
Oh, yes.
Supervisor Olivera, not at this time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I just promoted you.
Mr.
Mr.
Chair-
Mauer, do we have
Mr.
time to go on to the next issue? It is 12:30.
Yeah.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back at 2 o'clock. Doors will be open at what time, Madam Clerk? Probably about 10 minutes to 2, doors will be open.
She didn't have her mic on.